You're listening to NTParanormal After Dark. Nothing normal about it.
Oh, hey. Holy crap, you guys came back. Good to see everybody. I see people joining up in the chat. Hey, Sharon. Hey, Casa. Hey, Salvador. Allie, Julie. It's good to see you guys all again. Anyway, so came back, do another weekly podcast. I'm doing pretty good actually doing these every week now. So there's a couple of topics that I can't do yet because my co-host isn't available right now. She's in Gainesville at the moment. So saving some of the better topics for then, and I've got some solo topics in my back pocket for me to talk to you guys about solo. I don't know. But I don't know if y'all been following the site lately. I just posted a blog post up here pretty recently. Kind of, I don't even know how to describe the subject matter of it really, other than ever since I was a kid, I had reoccurring nightmares. Like there's like 4 or 5 of them that used to happen like a lot more frequently than they do now. I haven't had them in a while, but just like the other night out of nowhere, just like boom, one popped up. You know, and like it was so weird because I was having the dream, and as I was having the dream, like everything was so familiar. I'm like, oh wow, I've done this before. This is like a reoccurring thing. But I like while I was in the dream, I didn't know what was happening next. It was so weird. But it's like as soon as I snapped awake out of it, like I immediately, I'm like, oh my god, it was that thing again. That's so cool because it hadn't happened in like And that's kind of my personality too. Like when I have a nightmare, like I wake up, I'm only like momentarily stunned. Like after that, I'm like, oh, that's awesome, you know. And I immediately think of like how to apply that to like writing a book or you know, I'm a dork. I play RPG games and stuff, and I apply it to things like that. But I got to thinking about it, and I had actually forgot that reoccurring dream was actually kind of reminiscent of an actual memory that I had when I was little, which like led to some other revelations. But I wrote it. I don't want to spoil the whole article by talking about it here, but you know, I kind of wrote about it, and it kind of touches a little bit on why memory is faulty, and that's even mine, because one of the things I found out like in the past 10 years is I actually have a photographic memory. And it took so long to figure that out because it's depicted so weird in movies, like it's not depicted accurately, right? So it's something I didn't actually realize that I had, but even my memory is faulty. Like I can't rely on my memory in investigations and things like that because I'm going to recall the data, you know, differently. And I kind of touch on that in the article. And it kind of led me down a path of thinking about some, you know, other topics, things like that. But one of my big sticking points with my group, with my team, and in the research that we do collectively is ethics. Like that's a big thing to me. And it became a sticking point mainly because when we first got into it, we didn't get help from other groups. One of the things is at least where I'm from, it seems like paranormal investigation or ghost hunting, whatever you want to call it, it's kind of it's not even kind of, it is a competitive field, especially when you have multiple teams that are interested in paranormal activity and going on investigations and things like that in the same area. They get territorial. Now, we never were. We just, I don't know what it was about us, but we were never territorial about it. Like, oh, we're going to go investigate this place, and then we're not going to tell anybody where to find it or try to keep other groups out of there or anything like that. We've always shared our evidence with other groups. We've always discussed different possibilities. But it also got us singled out a lot because a lot of the things that we were doing, our methods and things weren't really accepted by the other groups because they do things different ways. But our style and our focus changed over the years because of what we saw other groups doing. A lot of the other groups that we ran into in person and online, we didn't feel like they were being ethical. And so it's something that we kind of actually stepped back and really took a good long look at, because, when we first started doing it, we were ghost hunting just like everybody else. And I mean, I'm not ashamed of that. I'm perfectly fine with that. And it's great if you're a hobbyist, not everybody is actually doing research so that they can do a research paper on it, or so that they can put videos online. Some people are just doing it because they enjoy doing it, and they don't need scientific proof or validity or anything like that. They're just doing it for the love of it or the thrill of it. And that's how we started out, and that was fine. But we quickly found out, me, Allie, and Sarah, that, we're all logic based. We look for truth and everything. We could only do stuff half-assed for so long before we wanted to get serious about it. And that might actually have a lot to do with me, because, I mean, even in like my hobbies, like I'm a big video gamer. I'm a musician. I do a lot of audio tech stuff. I do graphic arts. I'm a computer programmer. Just everything that I do that I enjoy, I have always gone into it wholeheartedly and invested I just throw myself at it. I'll throw myself into a project, writing, art, be it whatever it is. I will invest the money and the time and everything I have into it. And paranormal investigation was no different, because the experience I had that got me into it was so profound that there was no half-assing it. And so me being logical brained, Allie being, she's more adventurous than I am, but she's a very logical person. She went to school for forensics and things like that. Criminal justice, forensics, she's very logical. So when I presented the idea, like, hey, we should do this like scientifically, like look for the hard proof so that it's more or less irrefutable. She's, oh, that's awesome. And when I brought it up to Sarah, she was the same. She was an EMT for a couple of years. And she's actually, they both have more official schooling than I do in their fields. And they're logic and science based. Like they know things about psychology that I don't know. They know things about medicine I don't know. They know things. And like I'm educated, like I'm kind of spread out. I know a little about a lot of things, and they know a lot about specific things. And so, I know a lot about engineering and science, chemistry, not biology so much, but like physics and things like that. I'm just real studied in it. And so, hey Ryan, what's up, man? So we really kind of divided and conquered and decided, hey, okay, if we're going to keep doing this, let's not just go out there with recorders and come up with the same crap everybody else is coming up with. Let's do a concentrated focus, a concentrated, let's make it a study. Let's make it an actual research project where we're actually doing experiments that could withstand some scrutiny. And that's what we wanted to do. So we took a good hard look at what other groups were doing, and then we took a really, me especially, took a really hard look at what the holes were that were being poked in those theories, and I worked backwards from there. I was like, okay, so if so-and-so is doing all these experiments, and the scientific community says, okay, this is what's wrong with these experiments. These are the whole, you didn't, and the main thing that came up every time is they weren't using a control. And I was like, okay, immediately we have to go to square one. Let's try to do some of the same things, but let's add control steps to it. Let's use the scientific method. So, and that's kind of how we evolved to what we were doing, where I don't even think of us as investigators anymore. I think of us as paranormal researchers. And, maybe there's not a whole lot of difference, except that, I'm actually looking to log the data so that, I can write about it and actually present, at least an educated conclusion in some of our hypotheses, And so that's kind of where I went with it. But we ended up there because we were looking at other groups not being ethical. Now, what do I mean about not being ethical? Ethics at its basis is honesty. And being a paranormal investigator, that's a really hard thing to do. I mean, it shouldn't be a hard thing to do, but it is, because we're talking about a field that's based on pseudoscience. It's based on a lot of hearsay. It's based on faulty evidence. If depending on how you gather your evidence and things, it's all faulty. So if you're in the type of group that works with clients, like you get called in, asked to do things, and you're going to report your findings to them, a lot of that is going to be conjecture. A lot of that's going to be based on causality. And in any other field, that would not be considered ethical. If I was a doctor, or let's say I was an oncologist, right? And you came to me for different, that's a bad example because I'm not the medical person in my group, but I mean, if I was an oncologist and you came to me because you were referred to me because they think you have cancer, and I just took one look at you and I said, well, you have achy joints and you're sick all the time, you definitely have cancer, but I didn't do any tests, or I didn't do the proper tests. Like, I based that conclusion on just some indicators that kind of work with it. I mean, I would be the worst oncologist ever. You wouldn't accept that. But for some reason in the paranormal field, when somebody is even halfway convinced that they have something paranormal going on in their life or in their house, and then a paranormal investigator comes out and presents their evidence based on things that really wouldn't be accepted in other fields, and say, yeah, your house is definitely haunted, or there's definitely spirits, or things like that, it's accepted. It's just, and it's the way these groups present themselves. And it's not necessarily that they're wrong. Like I said, it is a field that's full of conjecture, but we had problems with the ethicality of it. And so we just wanted to stress and make sure that we were being ethical in what we were saying. And I'm not saying we were always that way. In the beginning, we were kind of doing the same things, or thinking along the same pattern. And we actually had to stop, take a step back, take a little break, and decide, like, okay, what's actually acceptable to say to a client? What experiments actually prove anything, and what things are we just actually doing because we saw somebody else do it? Or what are we doing that just looks good on camera and makes the episode interesting? And all those things are fine, but you really have to break it down into those levels and recognize what it is you're doing, and be honest with yourself about it before you can be honest with, you guys, my audience, about it. And that's really important to us, because I feel like that's absolutely the first step to building good credibility. And building good credibility gets you better investigations, and it gets you indoors. Doing investigation this way, doing investigation the way that we do it. Hey, Jen, how's it going? Has really opened some doors to us that I think are closed to a lot of other groups. Us not using psychics, us not using sensitives or mediums, or just making wild ass claims and in second guesses. That has really got us into a few circles that otherwise we wouldn't have a voice in, which I think is really important. I actually get to have conversations, online. Like, I'm not name dropping or anything, but I get to have conversations with electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, physicists, things like that, who normally, they would see paranormal investigator on your resume or whatever, and they just, I don't want to talk to this guy, he's full of crap. But the fact that we approach our investigations in that totally honest, credible, ethical way, and definitely define that fact from opinion, that has opened those doors up to us so that we can actually progress. And from there, I've been able to talk to those people and find even more holes in what we're doing. And because of that openness to change the way we do things, has allowed us to come up with new experiments that other groups don't do, different ways of doing things, different ways of looking and understanding, like really expanding how we're looking at things. And that's not just a skepticism angle either. You know, a lot of people look at us and they're like, oh, well, you're just skeptical. You just want to shit on everything. That's not necessarily true. We just want to find a conclusion to things that we can find a conclusion to, so that when we do find that evidence, it really shines. It really stands out. While another group may come away from a place that we've been to a bunch of times and come away with 30 pictures of orbs and one picture of an apparition, and and just everything's haunted everywhere they go. And, we'll go to 4 or 5 different places and we will only come back with one EVP or one image or a very, very small amount of physical evidence that, we're presenting is truly, something could possibly be going on, right? But that stuff stands out more when it comes from us, because people know that we do our due diligence in trying to actually uncover the reality of things that are going on. So I think it makes our evidence that much stronger. So we talk about ethics all the time. And I've actually, I went and pulled some stuff off our FAQ actually, because I've got a bunch of emails and things like that, about how would I set up an experiment? What would be the proper way to set up this experiment? What do you mean by ethics? Is it okay to do this? How do you, right? So I pulled a few different questions or whatever. The first one that struck me, and the one that kind of got the wheels turning on this particular episode was, as a paranormal investigators, what qualifications do you actually have to tell clients that their location has a legitimate paranormal activity? That's a damn good question, actually, and that's one I actually pose back to all paranormal groups and ourselves. For one, we never tell we never tell a client or people that their place actually is haunted beyond a doubt. We always leave that window open for it's something that we just couldn't prove or understand. Because the thing is we can't prove that anything. If hauntings could be proven, it wouldn't be paranormal, it would be normal. So when we come up with things that suggest that there actually could be paranormal activity, it's an open-ended result. It means that our experiment could not be brought to a conclusion. We ruled out as many things as we could possibly figure out using controls and investigative techniques. That doesn't necessarily mean it is paranormal. It just means that we couldn't find the physical answer to it. But I mean, more directly to what the question is what makes anybody, as paranormal investigators, what makes you qualified to actually tell somebody that there's paranormal activity going on? Well, the thing is you have to be very, very clear about what is fact and what is opinion when you're talking with these clients. There's no such thing. And this is going to get down to a kind of semantics argument, so kind of follow me here for a minute. But there's no such thing as an expert in paranormal studies, and there's no such thing as a professional in paranormal studies. And I say it gets down to semantics because I think a lot of people say that, but that's not what they actually mean. I don't think they're trying to be dishonest. An expert in paranormal activity or would indicate that they have some kind of credential in specifically paranormal activity that in like parapsychologists will get thrown around a lot. That does not make you an expert in paranormal activity. Parapsychology is not an accredited class. It is not an accredited degree. It hasn't been for a while. I think I don't want to get this wrong, but I think there's maybe like 1 or 2 schools overseas that still have parapsychology programs. But I know specifically for the U.S., there are no schools with accredited parapsychology programs. If anybody that's saying they have a PhD in parapsychology got their thing online, I have a PhD in parapsychology. It cost me $40 online. That did not make me an expert. I didn't have to do anything to get that. They sent me a CD that had a whole bunch of supposed EVPs on it, pictures, in like the history of spirit photography. And it had a lot of good information on it, but it had it was kind of BS. And so people that are throwing that credential around as their citation of experience, that's not fair. That's not being an expert. There's no such thing as a professional. Well, I take that back. There can be professional investigators, but the thing is anybody that's presenting themselves as a professional investigator, indicating that they get paid to do it, that's somebody I wouldn't trust. And I mean, that's going to come up later in the questions about in the ethics discussion is getting paid for it. But being a professional means you get paid to do something. And actually, Allie in my group used to call me on that because it was back to that semantics thing, because I'd say, hey, we're professional paranormal investigators. And she'd say, no, don't say that. We're not professional paranormal investigators. There's no such thing. And, I was kind of taken aback. I was like, well, we act professional and, we do everything to a certain standard. That's what I was meaning by professional. But it's the way it was being presented or the way it was being said was saying that this is what we do for a living. Like it's our main source of income, which if somebody is making enough income on being a paranormal investigator, I'm really, really questioning their ethics on it for multiple reasons. And that's not to say you shouldn't be compensated for helping people sometimes. I just, in the field of paranormal investigation where there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of conjecture, there's a lot of conclusions based on causation, it doesn't seem right to get paid for that. So I don't think there's anybody that can really claim they're an expert in paranormal. I don't think there's anybody that can really claim they're a professional in paranormal. However, you can be experienced. You can be seasoned. So those things that I was talking about, professionalism, certain standards, things like that, that would be a level of experience. And it's that experience that would actually give you that sort of qualification to make a judgment. But then again, it also goes back to the kind of group you are. Are you the kind of group where everywhere you go, it's haunted? Or are you the kind of group where everywhere you go, nothing's ever haunted? Or are you the kind of group that actually looks at things objectively? Now, like I said, my group would never, ever say that, okay, we definitely think there's something in your house. We would only present the evidence to you. Be like, okay, we found this list of 20 things that happened that are kind of in line with what you were talking about or kind of made us scratch our heads, right? Out of those 20 things, 10 of those things we figured out right off the bat. There's nothing paranormal about it. You have a loud water heater, you have creaky boards over here, the house settles in this place, you get a draft in this room, things like that. The other 5 things, 3 of those, the other 5 things, we didn't exactly find what it is, but these 3 things out of the remaining 5, there's at least 10 different things it could be. We just didn't catch it happening at the time. And then the last 2 things, we have no idea what that thing is. So those last 2 things are kind of where your paranormal activity could possibly take place, right? That's where people need to make their own conclusions. Because the thing is like, it would be so stupid for me to say, okay, these last 2 things that happened, we could not find a cause for. They're definitely paranormal. And then say I present it to the client that way. You definitely have a haunting because these 2 things happened, right? We got this specific EVP. And then I play the EVP for them, and they're like, no, that's me talking in the backyard. Like, I remember saying that, they have information that I don't have or I couldn't find, or maybe I did a bad job, or I set the experiment up wrong, the control wasn't quite right. There's a million things it could be before it's a ghost. And especially if the client's got knowledge that I don't have, and then I go in and I present this like a dumbass, and then they come back to me and they're like, okay, you're obviously an idiot because that's what this is. So I would never go to a client and say, yeah, your house is definitely haunted, because there could always be there's always an explanation if you don't leave yourself an out then when people actually find flaws in the things that you're pointing out as paranormal, they're going to view it as if you're intentionally deceiving them. Like there's not a lot of room for making mistakes in the field, so you have to be very careful about what is fact and what's conjecture. Let's see. I don't think the audio cut out for too long. What I was getting into and what I was blabbering on about while you guys couldn't actually hear me was the experiments. How are you How is your group performing their experiments? And the thing we found out very early on, when we were I don't think you missed the rest because I restarted because the audio cut out, Julie. Hey, if you can hear me, throw up like a thumb up or let me know that you can hear me. I just want to make sure the audio is going because now I got 6 people watching and I don't even know if I'm actually streaming my voice anymore. My mic indicator's up, but it never went out the first time. But anyway, God, I'm hoping I'm actually broadcasting. But anyway, so I wanted to talk about like the way you set up experiments and things like that because if you're okay, thanks guys, I appreciate it. And share the feed if you can to get bring more people in. So as a part in ethics, though, it depends on how you're doing your experiments, how you're doing your research and things like that. And one thing that like I noticed right off the bat, and it was one of the things. Thanks, Richard. I appreciate it. One of the things I noticed right off the bat is other groups that they weren't using controls in their experiments, which that leaves a whole host of possibilities. And then when they come back and say, yeah, this thing is like definitely paranormal, you're like, well, what about these other 5 things that this could be? Like you didn't have proper control set up. You may have had a hypothesis, but it was almost like you were working backwards. And I feel like a lot of people don't have an actual grasp on like how the scientific method actually works. A lot of people think it's just this list of things that you hit. And, being an engineer, like I had a lot of experience with this. So this is something that I brought to my group. And so the first thing is a lot of people think that the scientific method is which I brought up a chart here. The scientific method is actually linear, but the thing is it's actually circular. Scientific method, it has a beginning, obviously, the genesis of the idea of what you're going to do for the experiment, but it's unending in the fact that once you get to the end of the flow chart, it's got one of 2 ways that it can go, and it's always going to bring you right back to the start. And if we take a closer look at this, like really it starts like it can actually start in kind of these 2 sections here, right? Develop general theories, make observations, right? So you're going to notice basically what it's saying is you're going to notice certain things are going on. And like in the paranormal field, it's going to be like, I hear weird sounds in my house, right? And you're going to develop a general theory about it, but it's going to lead you to ask questions about that. The interesting questions are going to be, here in like step 3 is this a haunting? Is this a natural phenomenon that's happening in my house? Things like that. From there, you're going to formulate a hypothesis on that. And that's going to, and I want to stay away from the word theory. Theory means something different in science than it does in real life, right? A hypothesis, it's a guess. It's just a thought process. It's okay, based on these couple little observations and questions I asked myself, I kind of have an idea what might be going on. But you're still not sure. It's still open-ended. Theory in science actually means it's all the way proven, but it can expand out. Like there's still more explanation as part of that explanation. It's not the whole story, right? So hypothesis and theory are 2 different things, and that's one of the arguments that drives me nuts when people are arguing science. They're like, oh, it's like the theory of relativity, or I mean, technically gravity is a theory, but I'll be damned if it's not proven. But people don't really actually really grasp that if you're outside of a scientific sort of field or scientific way of thinking. Hey, Eric, what's up, man? So you develop a hypothesis on it. From there, if you actually want to see if your hypothesis is correct, is you're going to develop tests for it. And the way you do that is you're going to gather data to test the predictions, right? So, and that's going to come through experimentation. You're gonna say, okay, if I poke something in this certain way, how is it going to react? If I go in and I do, it's always going to be, what's the reaction? If I do such and such, how is this thing going to react? And you're going to gather data on it. From there, it's going to go from one of two ways. You're either going to get the data that you were looking for and develop another general theory on it and keep expanding out until you've explained that whole entire process, or you're going to go back and you're going to have to refine, alter, and expand or reject your hypothesis. And that's I think that's the thing that makes a lot of paranormal investigators unethical, because it's this very last one, reject hypothesis. We are so attached. Hey, Jen, glad you joined again. We are so attached to our idea that we already know what's going on, or that it's a spirit, or that it's a ghost, or it's this certain thing, that we are afraid to let go of the idea that we know, that we have a handle on what's going on. A big part of experimentation is failing. Failure is almost as much of a success as proving yourself as a success. Because at least with a failure, you know what something isn't beyond a shadow of a doubt if you've set up your experiments properly, right? So I have always, as far as experimentation goes, I have always embraced my failures, because, okay, so I failed at proving it was this thing, but at least I know it's not that thing. Now I only have 999 other things to look at, as opposed to 100. It's one thing off the list. Oh, back to high school. I think I pulled this diagram up from a report I did in high school, to be honest with you, Jen. It wouldn't surprise me. It was, believe it or not, it was already on my hard drive. I didn't have to go on the internet for that. But the scientific method, it's not just about how you set up your experiments. It's the process that you take to get to the point that you're doing an experiment, and how you actually look at the data, interpret that data, and then go back and decide whether or not that data gave you the information you actually needed, and whether or not you need to on the reformulate my hypothesis bit on reject. There have been tons of times where I've gone in and I thought, okay, I definitely know what's doing this. And then, I kind of set up an experiment for that. Mono wavelength photography, for instance, that is still an experiment that we refine every single investigation. Like, it does prove almost, it's like 99% there, almost beyond a shadow of a doubt, that orbs that we capture are particles of matter that are floating in the air, right? But the thing is there's still a 1% margin of error. And so when we started doing that experiment, we thought we knew what kind of data we were going to get back from that, because initially we were only using a red filter, because it was based, the initial experiment was actually based on a wives' tale, not hard science, right? So we were only doing it with one color. But then as we were doing the experiment, it's like it suddenly dawned on us, well, what the hell happens if there's a ball of energy that's in the same spectrum that we're trying to bounce light back in? It's not going to show up. It's just going to it's either going to be blank, or it's going to show up the same way all the other orbs did. So, we had to refine, we had to kind of change the way our hypothesis worked. We had to alter and expand and refine the experiment to start including multiple wavelengths of light over the course of different pictures, so that we could increase our chances of catching anomalies in different colors. It just happens that red was the one that we kind of hit upon by accident that worked the best, because it kind of dips into that infrared spectrum. It was pure luck that we did it, but it was through that process that we found that, right? But it wouldn't be ethical for me to actually say, well, I completely came up with this idea based on a hypothesis of postulation and blah, 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 just word vomit all over the thing. And the reality of it is a lot of science does come from dumb luck, but then you have to go in and refine it, prove what you found, figure out if it was just a coincidence, a mistake, things like that. Like you have to really have control over these things. Now, that's all the part leading up to the experiment. I pulled up these two diagrams of these two basic experiments, and the main thing you're going to notice is all of them. Well, maybe you won't notice because the colors are goofy, but they both have a control. And my big problem with most groups is when they're going in, they're doing these experiments. They're taking EMF readings, they're taking decibel readings, they're looking at heat that's in the room. They're taking different measurements of the environment, same way we would do, but they're not using any controls. There's no comparative control to the things that they're working on, right? So who's to say that data that they're getting back isn't out of the ordinary or necessarily paranormal in a very far stretch of the word? Those controls are very, very important. And if you don't have some kind of control in your experiment, some way to isolate the data that you're pulling in, you're not doing an experiment. You're just playing around with toys. You don't actually understand how they work. If you're not using them appropriately and you're getting some kind of data hit back, you're using it inappropriately. That data is no longer reliable. So if you go to present that to the client, I got this EMF hit here, while I was flailing around in the other room because a bat startled me, or the decibel readings were off the charts, but your entire team was in the other room chain smoking and talking about something that happened on their lunch break at work. It's not a controlled experiment. You're not ethically presenting that. You're not being ethical because you're trying to pass something off as evidence that is flimsy at best. And I'm happy for those groups. I'm happy for their enthusiasm. But if you're not putting forth the effort to make sure that you are properly documenting things, and then you're trying to present it to other people as hard evidence, and you're like hardcore in groups trying to convince people and bring people over to your side, and you're calling such and such an idiot on the paranormal hauntings board because they're not a believer, then that's wrong, because you're not doing your due diligence. You're not being ethical. And that's the part I have a problem with. Now, if say you're doing all those experiments and you're not using a control and you get an EVP or whatever, and you goddamn know it's an EVP, but you didn't have all the controls in place, that's fine. If that's your evidence, you're like, hey, I think this is a thing. I'm not trying to convince, in you're honest about, you're like, there was all this other stuff going on, and there could be other things happening. There could be things going on that I didn't understand at the time. But I really, really have a strong feeling that this is something, and like you're just connecting with it. That's completely different. You've not lost any respect for me or my group or anybody else in the field, because you're not out there browbeating somebody with information that's unreliable. Hey, Nikki, how's it going? And so it's all in the way that you present those things. And if you're going to present them as, okay, I'm an expert, I'm a professional in this field, I'm a seasoned investigator, however you want to choose to say it, and then you present this data and you're telling these people these things, you could cause potential damage if you really don't know what you're talking about. Say these people, say you tell somebody their house is haunted, and they don't want you to remove it. They don't want you to do anything. All they want to do is sell their house. But they really can't afford to do that. But they're so scared because of some casual comment you made that they go ahead and do it anyway. And they put their whole family in jeopardy because you caught some strange sound that you really don't have a backing for, right? Or let's say they do want a removal and they end up calling a priest or Aunt Sally or something like that who comes out and does an exorcist, but it turns out there really is nothing going on, but the kids are exposed to that sort of environment, and it gives them debilitating nightmares for the rest of their life. I mean, one of the reasons I had nightmares, and I apologize because my mom is actually watching this podcast, but one of the reasons I had nightmares is because my mom was very, very into like occult and paranormal and things like that. And in our household, we didn't have a lot of censorship. Like, I was allowed to watch horror movies when I was a kid. And now that I'm an adult, I appreciate these things. I mean, it wasn't like crippling, but I slept with the light on till I was probably like 10 years old because I was afraid of these things because, I heard adult conversations about them. So like, that's a very real thing. And like, while I'm not saying that that's the most traumatic thing that could happen, I'm just saying that there are consequences. And just like the experiment, every cause has an effect. And so if you're not being ethical, you're not being careful, you're not monitoring your own opinions and things like that when you're presenting this information, you can cause damage even though hell is paved with good intentions. I mean, and that's what I was saying before, is I don't necessarily think these groups are going out here and swindling people. I don't think these. I think 9 out of 10 groups are completely honest, but they're just a little overexcitable, about the things that they find, or they just don't have a deep understanding about it. And when I talk to a lot of other groups, I try to be as polite as possible, like when discussing evidence or swapping stories, things like that. And I always try to explain. I'm like, well, we're a little more specialized. We do research, like we go into the psychological aspects of our research. We go in. We're not just looking for physical evidence either. We're actually looking for the causes of paranormal activity, whether it's actually paranormal or not. And they're like appalled that we're not going in and just taking EMF readings and looking up the history of the house to see if anybody was murdered there and things like that. I'm like, we do things in a different order. We have it in a big thing with our group is control. Only when we go into these places, obviously when we're invited and we talk with the clients, a few of us know the history or like what the experiences are already, but we don't tell the other half of our group that's actually in there doing it because we don't want to taint that. Eric has something here. We encountered a gentleman who moved immediately because an investigator jumped to them having a demon infestation without conducting an in-depth interview. Had the investigator done the interview, they would have discovered that the guy was always on psychedelics whenever he had an encounter. Oh my God. And that's right. That is exactly like one of the points I was getting to. And, we always kind of try to give them a questionnaire. I try to find a clever way to ask, like, are you on any sort of medications? Because it is an important question. But it's also a pretty probing one. I mean, especially like with HIPAA and things like that, because they think like if they're on anti-anxiety meds or if they take psychedelics or, they drop mushrooms or acid or whatever, that's certainly going to alter their perception of reality around them, at least to an extent, at least make them more pliable to suggestion. But they're afraid you're gonna give out their personal data and like air something that might be dirty laundry or things like that. Like I'm not even bashing on psychedelics or marijuana or most recreational drugs. Like I don't have a problem with that. But some people, they don't necessarily want the entire neighborhood or everybody on the internet knowing that. So a lot of times they won't be honest with you about it. And, in the back of your head, you're suspecting, but you have to assume every client is honest about their experiences and about like what they do recreationally and things like that. But that's another matter of ethics. If a client gives you information and confidence like that, it is not okay to air that just to make a video or a podcast like I'm doing right now, right? That's to remain ethical. You basically have signed a non-disclosure agreement with anybody that you're doing anything with, unless they have given you permission to actually share these are their experiences. And I mean, you can here. I know there's a lot of people watching that aren't in the U.S., so I don't know the legality of it there. But here in the U.S., if I film it or I record it, that's my footage. It doesn't matter if your face is in it or what. But as somebody that's doing research, not filming a TV show, I'm just not that big of an asshole. I'll give the footage to you. I don't want you using it to go make a movie with. Like, I own it in that respect, but I don't own it in the respect. I'm just going to show it to whoever I want without you first giving me the okay to do that. I don't want to steal your experiences. And the fact is like, we don't make money off of it. You know, we're completely self-funded. We don't make any money off of any of the videos we release or these podcasts or anything like that. As a matter of fact, our YouTube channel is completely unmonetized because it cuts down on the ads, and it's just too much of a hassle. I had them monetized for a little while, and you know, we were making like 3 cents a year or something. I was just like, screw it, I don't want to do that anyway. You know, plus we use some like borrowed audio content, like for songs and things like that in there. And it's too much of a hassle. So it just, there's a lot of lines that you have to toe in this field. And it's not all 100% about, your relationship to the evidence but your relationship to the client as well. And it's all about that client investigator relationship too. And things can totally go haywire between you and the rest of your group. I've seen, like, we haven't been doing this long, and we've seen so many groups already just blow up internally because of difference of opinion on, like, should we be making it? And it actually, every group that I've seen fall apart, it's actually because, I'm trying to think, it'll be one of two things. It'll be logistics. But I see that one pretty rarely. Most people just keep going on. But every time I see a group explode, it's because someone or someone's in the group were breaking ethical codes. Somebody's always pissed because somebody was either faking evidence, insisting that we take money or donations or things like that. And that always seems to be what actually splits the group up. It's always egos and money sort of thing. I imagine if my group splits, it's going to be because of my own ego, to be perfectly honest. But I always I try to keep myself in check by making the other group members keep me in check. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You know, my mental health problems are very, very, very public. So I rely on them to keep me grounded and just tell me when I'm being an asshole. Because I will be. I just get that way because, and it goes back to what I was saying about like the way I approach all my hobbies. Like I just get totally engrossed in them and just like obsessive. Like I'm pretty OCD about things like that. And so I'm doing it because I found something I really like. I found something that I love, and I want everybody else to love it. I want them to love it to death, just like I do. Hey, Owie, how's it going? So I mean, and those are some of the major points that, from like my perspective, but then there's things, and I don't even know how to really approach the topic just perfectly either, because we don't use them in our group. But if you're a sensitive medium or a psychic, how the hell do you stay ethical? And I don't have the answer to that question, because the thing is it's something I only very, 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 very distantly even have an inkling of. I think it's something that's possible. I don't know that I've ever met somebody that really is 100% a medium. I mean, maybe and I don't think that everybody that tells me they're a medium is a liar. I think that there are other explanations for the things that they know. Like, I don't necessarily think it's through the mechanic they think it is. I think we have different definitions of what it is that they're doing. Like, they're very, very empathetic, but they attribute it to psychic ability, right? You know, it's the same thing, different mechanic, right? You say tomato, I say fruit. I don't know a better way to say that. But so how do they stay ethical? Because when they go into a place, it wouldn't be fair to force every psychic, medium, sensitive, or what we're gonna call them mediums from here on out. But it's a blanket statement, okay? That doesn't mean everybody's a medium. But for every medium that goes into a house and says, I feel spirits here, it's not fair for me to shoehorn them into saying that's their opinion. To them, it's not their opinion. Let's assume they're not lying, okay? Let's assume they're not con artist mediums. This is somebody that actually believes what they're saying, right? And they go in and they say, you have something living here, or not living, but you have something here with you. It's this, and this. It's not fair for me to say, okay, you have to state that as an opinion because you can't prove it. It's not an opinion to them. They really think it's a fact. The problem is it's a fact that they can't prove to the rest of us. So I hate anything where I don't have a clear answer. I mean, that's why I take a scientific approach to paranormal investigation anyway. But it's not their opinion, and I understand that it's not their opinion, but it's not a fact either. It's like this really strong in-between thing where they have no evidence and they have no way to prove it. It's just this really strong sort of intuition thing. And it all comes down to like what their accuracy is of things that they couldn't possibly know, to really convince me that they're even remotely on the right track. Like, I'm telling you, it's so lopsided with me. I'm the worst person to actually communicate with these people because I just piss them off, because I have such a hard time grasping it because I'm so scientifically minded, and I don't mean to come off that way. I hate that I come off that way. I'm lucky that I have a few friends. Like, one of our best friends in the paranormal community is Rose Domain with Harvest Rose Witchery, you know, and she is a sensitive medium rare, whatever. But you know, we recommend her. We have a lot of respect for her. She does her thing. Is it in me and her? In like, I love her to death because we can have adult conversations about this, and still come away with a mutual respect for each other and still be friends. I don't believe in magic. I don't believe in psychic powers. I don't believe in these things. But I do think there is a mechanic through which she kind of operates, be it maybe like the placebo effect and things like, or you know, just positive thinking, getting people to think positively, or just getting people to believe the things that are going on, you know, and then it creates change through those mediums. So, you know, while she's calling it magic, or you know, sensitivity, I'm calling it empathy and, you know, suggestion and things like that. And she's not somebody that's intentionally like deceiving people. Like, she helps people. Everybody she's ever helped has felt like we've always got a good report afterwards. Oh yeah, she came in and everything's great now. We love talking to her. We're going to continue to keep a relationship. I mean, it's just really good. Like, so, you know, when I say things like that, I'm not calling everybody a liar. I'm saying that I don't know. I don't know how to verbalize what it is. And this is probably the worst time to not know how to verbalize something, when I'm doing a podcast and everything is about me verbalizing it. So, but I understand it's not an opinion. It's not fair for me to say you have to state it as opinion to be ethical. But it's also not fair for anybody to have something that they can't prove beyond a shadow of a doubt and say it's a fact either. So there's got to be some kind of mutual understanding in there, and I'm not quite sure how to get there. The other thing is like I talked about Rose, and part of her thing is she does spirit removals. When we go in and we do an investigation and the client really, really feels like that some of that 2% evidence that we found is actually a spirit and they actually want it gone. They're not, like, we always try to convince them, like, okay, if you want it gone, just try ignoring it for a while. It usually ends up going away, right? But sometimes they're like, no, I want somebody to come in. I want somebody to remove this. How do you do that ethically? Like that has always been a sticking point. We don't do that sort of thing. We just come in and collect the data, and then we usually hand it off to Rose or someone else that the client is comfortable with. But we take on clients of all different religious faiths, things like that. There are certain things that are incompatible. A lot of Catholics may or may not want Rose in their house because she practices voodoo. To be fair, though, a lot of Catholics wouldn't call us out as paranormal investigators because, we dabble in the occult, so to speak. Not really, but it's just kind of that view. So I don't know how you can do spirit removal ethically. Because, one psychic may go in and say, oh, you have this type of demon or whatever, and it can only be gotten rid of through, I don't know, some Native American ritual, right? Because it's a Native American thing, but, people don't want Native American magic in their house. Well, are you really stuck with that thing that's in there, or I don't know. There's this, and that's where you get into the blurred lines of it, and that's why I steer away from it with my particular group. I just want to collect the hard facts and present it, and then let people decide for themselves what they think is appropriate to do to deal with those things. But then, the other ethics of it is say someone comes into your house and does like a blessing or an exorcism or a banishment, whatever it's called at the time, right? And the stuff keeps happening. They keep going with it. Man, how ethical is that when you come back? Do you say, oh, well, it's actually something else? Like, you're dealing with an unknown with these people, because if they could deal with it on their own, or if they were sensitive or understood it, then they would have done it all themselves. So they're relying on that information that you're giving them as the sensitive, the psychic, the demonologist, the removal expert, exorcist, whatever you want to call it. And when things still happen, where do you go from there? Were you being ethical in the investigation that you gave when you said it was paranormal in the first place? Or is it not going away because there is actually a logical explanation that doesn't go away when you try to banish demons that weren't there in the first place? If it was really just leaky pipes up in the or rodents up in the attic, and you're downstairs doing an exorcism, and 2 weeks later you hear those same rodents again, I don't think that the initial investigation was very ethical, or at the very least very thorough, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of questions that come up with that, which also brings up a good thing. There's a lot of people that do like removals and stuff that charge. And it brings up a good question. I've been asked about it a lot. In fact, every single event we've been to, people are like, oh, we really want an investigation, but, we can't afford it. And I'm like, what do you mean afford it? Like, it was the weirdest thing for us, because it never occurred to us that we could charge for a paranormal investigation, because it just seemed wrong. Remember, it's what Patrick says. Hey, Patrick, how's it going? Remember, it's what the client believes. No, absolutely. And that's what I mean about being ethical. Like, I just want to present the facts to them, right? If you absolutely, beyond a shadow of a doubt, prove that some things are this, and this, that's great. And then if you find some things that are kind of open-ended, present that to them. It's up to them to decide what to do with that information. If they want to hire a priest, that's their business. I mean, maybe it's our business to help facilitate that. Like, if they really need to get in touch with some people or make some suggestions, things like that, absolutely be helpful. That's what we're there for. Like I said, my group doesn't do removals or anything like that because that would be BS. None of us know how to do that. None of us even believe in that sort of thing. It would be stupid for us to claim that we could do that. So we're going to find people that you're comfortable with to do that for you. It's absolutely about what they believe. It's and that goes back to what I was saying in the beginning of the podcast before it went crazy, is you have to be really, really careful about what you're presenting as facts and what you're presenting as opinions. And you shouldn't impose. When I go on an investigation, I absolutely, like, when I run into okay, so I've been playing this pretty straight so far. But the thing is like, when I find things I think are evidence, I know what it is. I'm like, okay, this is a demon. You know, it goes through my head too. I'm a logical person. This is a demon. This is a goat. But I don't tell the client that that's my opinion. That's my belief about what I think that data actually is, right? It's also and when we don't have an answer, it's also my opinion that I think it could also be a raccoon in the attic. But if I don't have the answer for that, it's a goddamned opinion. And I think the opinions need to stay out of that investigator-client conversation unless it's asked for. It's you present the facts first. If it's open-ended, it's open-ended. But you need to do what the client wants to do with that information. And if you really don't know how to do those things, or you don't come to the same opinion as them, it's your responsibility ethically to find somebody that can. And the problem is paranormal. And like I said, this may be a regional thing, but I think it's all over from looking at it on the internet. All these paranormal groups just go in swinging dick. They're so opposed to each other, and they're territorial, so they don't want to let another group come in and fix something that they couldn't fix. I don't care if I show them everything that I show them, and at the end of the day they still say it's ghosts, and they want some other investigators to come in and tell them it's ghosts, I'll give them the number. I mean, I got to go in, I got to do the investigation, I have my opinion on it. That's all I need. It's at that point, it's not about, I think it has a lot to do with egos, but if you're being ethical, you're not just doing lip service. You're not just telling people what they want to hear. Hey, Elena, how's it going? But, oh man, yeah, thanks for that, Patrick. That was a really good point you brought up. Put me on a tangent, but I was talking about, is it ethical for you to charge your clients? And Rose charges for a lot of the magic stuff she does, but that's people that contact her and want her to do things like that. But she never charges for like going in and doing banishment, like where she feels like people are in trouble, or they like they need their space completely like opened up, like they feel like there's a problem there. She's never charged for anything like that. She doesn't charge for that particular service. That's just something she does because it's the right thing to do. That's one of the reasons I really admire her and is like an ethical witch, right? So she goes in and helps people, and then if you want like spell work done or readings or things like that, you know, that's how she makes her money. That's fine. She does that in an ethical way. Yet there's other groups I've run into where they charge for paranormal investigations, like and it's not like where the people are in trouble, or actually that would be worse. That's in the wrong direction. If somebody needs help and you're, it's not like when they go to the doctor, like they're paying for a specific service with like a proven sort of result where you're going to give them medication that is proven to help like a certain thing, or they have an actual doctorate, you know, in physiology and things like that. It's pseudoscience. It's all based on conjecture. I'm charging you for a service that I can't 100% legitimately prove. No, it's when we get called on investigations, it's a privilege to get to go in there and do our research to our own end and do our own film and be able to do our own videos about it and talk about it and do podcasts. Like in all fairness, you absolutely, as the, maybe not the client, like if you're doing a residential and you need help and you're calling us out for help, I mean, there should be a mutual respect there. Like, you shouldn't charge us to come in your house for this because we're trying to help you. But I've never felt like it was ethical for a paranormal group to charge to do a legitimate investigation. I've never felt comfortable with it. I've seen certain groups that'll take donations. Donations are on the line. I think it's okay. In the past, I've thought about taking donations for our research, not necessarily from, I don't want them from clients. Maybe just people that like our content and wanted to donate through the website just to kind of add to the money that we have to buy equipment and do specific experiments and podcasts and keep our website up and things like that. But definitely not for profit. The investigation thing is something we never wanted to profit from. I would like it for it to not be a money sink like it is, because everything is funded straight out of our pockets. But it's absolutely not ethical to charge for investigations and things like that. And we came to that decision early on because we saw it go to the extreme. Maybe not. I'm not saying every group that charges or takes donations is necessarily bad. But I think it's one of those slippery slope things that we didn't even want to get close to, because initially, like right out of the gate, when we first started getting serious about our research, we specifically had run-ins with another group where they would go in, tell them they had demons, whether they did or not, and then basically browbeat these people into giving them donation. And to be fair, it wasn't the group. It was one person in their group. Remember how I said earlier that most groups break up because somebody breaks their own ethics code. And that was absolutely true in this case. This guy was going in and just doing some like really horrible things and just basically holding people's houses hostage by saying, well, you know, I need all this money to buy all these things, to do these light work rituals and just blah, 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 blah. And, you know, he was trying to get funds out of paranormal investigation. I've just never felt it was appropriate. And so, you know, when we first set up our website, it was set up for donations. And as soon as we ran into that and realized like how it could end up, we decided our credibility was too important to even risk it. So, you know, we don't accept, and we probably should take donations, like donations for research. I'm really curious to like write the government and see if I can get a government grant for like scientific research for paranormal activity, see if that actually flew. They'd probably send us like $15, but it would help. But, you know, I never wanted to take donations or anything like that. We took it down immediately, and we don't even do it now, because if it's not something important enough for us to save back the money to do it ourselves, it's not important. I mean, there's no way this is, you know, unless I ever end up on TV or we ever end up on TV, something like that, it's never going to become my day job. And I wouldn't want it to be. I probably wouldn't like it as much if it was, to be perfectly honest, because it's so hit or miss anyway. It's taking pictures and recordings and video and walking empty buildings, and it's just it's not something I want to become work. I like it as a passion. So I don't. So as far as ethics go, you know, staying with the theme, no, I don't think it's ethical for most groups to charge. However, the flip side of that coin is there's a lot of places that charge you to come in and do an investigation. Locally, you know, we have a few museums that have rumors of being haunted, things like that. And, you know, you can pay a small fee to get to stay in there overnight. That's fine. You're especially in the case of the museum, it's just a donation to the museum. It's specifically the one I'm thinking of. It's only $50. And they let our team go in there and stay overnight. I think that's absolutely acceptable. It's private property, and it would be no different like if you went to a hotel or something like that where you wanted to like rent some space for a party. That's all you're doing. You're just renting space for a party. You just happen to be doing paranormal investigation there. And I also think it's fine for places to, actually I think it's great when they do it, where they host like the guided flashlight tours and things like that. You know what you're getting when you go in there. There's nothing stopping you from saying, hey, could we rent this out for a private investigation and then make a little bit more money? I mean, because they have to maintain that place. I mean, there's bills associated with that involved. I think it can get exorbitant. I think they can get a little shisty and charge too much, but I don't see a problem with them doing it. It all depends on the popularity of the venue, and what's going on and what they're doing. But I absolutely agree with, them charging us to get in there and do an investigation. I don't see any problems with that. Which brings me to my, one of the other sticking points. It's delicious. One of the other sticking points is trespassing and breaking and entering. By the way, that is not ethical. If we're looking at our ethics meter here, that's like all the way in the red. That's worse than telling your client they have demons in their house. If your idea of ghost hunting is breaking into somewhere that you're absolutely not supposed to be in, you've lost a lot of there's a lot of places I want to go to that we're not supposed to be in. And back in the early days, we just walk up in there. Now I'm not talking like there's like abandoned buildings and stuff like that. Yeah, okay, you can walk up in there, and then if the authorities show, and politely leave, But I'm talking about like they're trying to actively keep people out. Like they got fences up. There's signs posted that say "Do not be on the property." Somebody owns it. You're really screwing with people. That's not okay. And hell, here in Texas, a lot of times that's not a warning. That's straight up getting arrested, and it's flat out freaking risky because I don't know how many of you guys live, in the South here, but we're all packing. I got 3 guns on me right now, and you can't even see them. But if you just walk up if you start trespassing in a place and you're holding out a piece of equipment like a dumbass, you're liable to get your head blown off because they're going to think it's a gun, and they're going to think you're trying to rob the place, or they're going to think you're trying to vandalize it at the very least. People are idiots. That is not ethical behavior. And if you get, it's not that I'll immediately discredit you for doing that. I'll think you're overly enthusiastic and you should have went through better channels. But the thing is if you get busted doing that and you get that on your record, it's there forever. And criminal records don't make you look very credible when you are trying to have like an open conversation with anybody, or like if you're trying to publish a scientific journal and they're like, Ashton Rogers says so-and-so, blah, 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 and somebody looks me up and then, there's a mugshot of me from 3 a.m. where I was trying to ghost hunt somewhere where I had to bust in a window to get in. They're probably not going to listen to my theories too much because I wasn't even smart enough to call the owner to get permission beforehand. So, just don't do it. If you're breaking, and you're ruining it for everybody else, by the way. If you're one of the groups or ghost hunters that's like sneaking around in the middle of the night and sneaking into places and getting caught and things like that, you guys are the people that are actually making the owners get pissed off enough that when the legitimate investigators call up and say, hey, can I do this? They say, no, I'm tired of people coming in here. I don't want the publicity. I don't want this and that. When it could have gone a completely different way. It could have went that, hey, we actually found some cool stuff in here. And then they see like some dollar signs and they're like, oh, maybe I can make a couple of bucks off of letting investigators come in here and do their investigations. Like, the transaction could go totally different, but because these a-holes go in and they break into places, or and especially if they like, oh God, I hate people that go in and like vandalize cemeteries and say they're doing paranormal investigation. That sort of thing just drives me nuts. So that's real high on the ethics conversation too. But I don't know. I don't know if I haven't seen any questions in a while, and I'm getting ready to wrap up. So if you guys have any thought on like ethical investigations, like what is actually involved in the process, in the idea of staying ethical as an investigator, and making that credibility even more. Be respectful. I'm not going to repeat that. If you got any thoughts, post them up. I like seeing the conversations continue after the podcast has stopped in the comments, and I'll answer emails or anything like that. Like, one of my final thoughts though, before I wrap up though, is, so I'm talking about all this ethical thing, and I realize I'm on a high horse. I'm basically talking about like what you're doing wrong as a group, and I hope I don't want to be that way. I hope it makes you, if you are doing some of the things that I've kind of flagged as unethical, I hope it kind of makes you at least rethink a little bit how you're approaching your investigations, at least, to kind of find a middle ground so that we can kind of cooperate better. But one of the final thoughts I kind of wanted to touch on is, especially with the ethics things, is an interesting idea was brought up to me a few days ago, and my knee-jerk reaction to it was I didn't like it, and then I kind of thought on it, and then I kind of I saw where he was coming from. Then I kind of liked it, and I kind of don't like it. I don't know. I'm on the fence about it, so I'm curious what you guys think. And should there be a standardization group or some kind of organization to help monitor the ethics of paranormal groups? And if so, who should run it? And that's a really good question, actually. Initially, I don't like it because I was talking about all the paranormal groups basically being territorial and combative, right? So if you put like one person in charge of that, or one group in charge of this sort of ethics committee or whatever, and they're not the right people, you're going to end up with this total bad thing. So I think it should really be like, if we did do something like that, it should be like a board of different types of investigators that have developed some kind of credibility or whatever. And it would kind of be in place, not to police it, but to kind of create a list of people that have kind of proven to be above and beyond. Kind of like the Angie's list of paranormal investigators. I mean, there's so many boards you can go on and post your group. We're listed on like 9 or 10 of them, and people find us that way. But I don't think there's anybody actually monitoring what we're doing, whether or not we're a credible group or anything like that. And I kind of feel like it would be a good thing if there was some kind of body of government, that kind of looked at paranormal groups, and and it's not up to anybody to judge what anybody's doing, really, because it is such an open field and everybody's doing different things. Some of us have psychics, some of us do science, but like in the case of my group, we say we follow science or whatever, and this group would go in and say, okay, so they're just doing scientific analysis. How valid is it what they're doing? Are they do they get any bad reports from any of their clients? Are they taking money? Things like that. Like, just kind of collect data on all of it, and just kind of put it out there for everybody to see. And then if a certain group comes up in conversation a lot, or if a certain group it's more like the Better Business Bureau for paranormal investigators, is what I'm thinking. If there's enough complaints, I can run it. I have 3 guns. All right, thanks, Patrick. I don't want to run it, man. If there's enough complaints, though, those complaints will eventually like show up, and people will know that you're not credible. So really, it's just sort of a listing to kind of show credibility of groups, or how well they work with people, things like that. So I didn't see any more questions up there other than Elena's. comment about graveyard dirt. She also practices witchcraft. So I'll leave you guys with those final thoughts, and I hope everybody is having a good weekend. This weekend has investigations to do, and I hope you're practicing them ethically, not breaking in anywhere. I hope you're being safe. Don't drink too much. Let's see, throw out some thank yous to Harvest Rose Witchery, who I mentioned in the podcast. Wanted to give a quick shout out to Paranormal Investigations Equipment Pi for sending me this brand new Rodave diode that we're going to be using in some upcoming experiments. We actually already had one of these, but he sent me another one because we're going to run 2 at a time through a mixer to see if we can get different types of results and stuff. And he actually made this one special for me so that I could open it up and take a look at like the inner workings on this bad boy. We swap engineering stuff all the time. So go check them out. They're at they have some. He does some pretty good equipment actually. ParanormalInvestigationsequipment.com. Of course, if you have time, check out our book, things like that. And if you're one of the groups that's pissy about me putting plugs at the end of my podcast, just go ahead and remove me from your group, okay? Other than that, though, everybody have a great weekend. Have fun doing your thing, and everybody be safe. Later.